Let me just introduce you to the Houston Center really quick. I'm a theologian from Regent College, which is a graduate school affiliated with the University of British Columbia here. And the Houston Center is dedicated to fostering interdisciplinary dialogue on philosophical and theological anthropology. That's really the framework that we try to enter into. That is on the central question of human identity. And as a Christian institution, our desire to seek dialogue with other traditions and disciplines stems from the incarnation. So it's always been my point that from the very heart of our faith, what we do flows out from there. It is our belief that God's becoming human in Jesus of Nazareth to restore and perfect his creation establishes at the heart of our faith a common humanity that makes it imperative for Christians to dialogue with all who are concerned about human identity. And our response to the fundamental question of who we are lies at the heart of all human endeavors, including politics and the form of governance that we approve. It seems obvious, but it is worth recalling that one cannot seriously reflect on political systems without considering what kind of beings we are. Many Western countries pride themselves in their democratic governments. Now, when you ask people what they mean by democracy, you will likely receive the answer that this form of government is the most suitable for the self-governance of free individuals. But what do we mean by a free individual? Are we disconnected individuals, egocentric, isolated selves who are preoccupied with survival and therefore need the state to basically prevent us from killing each other? That was essentially, as you may recall, Thomas Hobbes' view of government. Or are we basically good individuals who need to give up individual rights and enter into a social contract to form a general will of a people in order to foster our lives together and to combat the corrupting influences of modern civilization? That was essentially Jean-Jacques Rousseau's view. In our day, we're being trained by transhumanist tech billionaires with utopian fantasies for the future of humanity to think of ourselves as complex biological computers whose lives are best managed by means of central, digital, bureaucratic technocracy that controls and optimizes our behavior. This is not a good vision. This technologically inspired view of human nature and governance, a techno-communism really, is the least compatible with the traditional Judeo-Christian conviction that human beings are made in God's image and therefore fundamentally free and fundamentally communal beings. According to this view, human beings transcend the mere biological, instinct-driven life and are therefore morally accountable, responsible beings. In contrast to the anthill or beehive, which usually function very well, human society cannot be measured by mere survival or efficient functionality. Instead, a society of persons succeeds to the measure that politics ensures and fosters the creative freedom and sociality of the human spirit. Some of you might recall Martin Buber's rightly famous book, I and Thou, in which he champions already in the 1920s just such a personalist view of reality. For Buber, a faithful Jew, both the state and the economy must serve what he calls the spirit of the human being, which is it's a relational and a dialogical spirit. For Buber, truth, which must underlie all humane political decisions, could only be attained through unrestricted private and public dialogue. Thus, freedom of speech was grounded in this necessity of interpersonal dialogue. A censorious form of government would therefore be totally unsuitable for a democratic society and for truth-finding. Many other philosophers, notably the scientist-philosopher Michael Polanyi, have written eloquently on this necessity, this necessary dependence of truth on the free exchange of opinions at all levels of society. So, if liberal democracy depends on governance based on freedom, dialogue, and truth, how are we doing? How is Canada doing? Tonight we have the privilege of hearing from one of the most clear and uncompromising voices that I know on the issue of liberal democracy. Whether we agree with Bruce Pardy or not, I'm certain his lecture will help us think more clearly about liberal democracy. So before I introduce him just now, let me tell you what will happen. Professor Pardy will lecture for about 45 minutes or so, and then there was going to be a response, which we will skip. You'll get like a 2-minute break to stretch yourselves while we move over to this table, and then I will start the kind of interview dialogue that I wanted to have with the two speakers, and we'll have to wing it with Bruce and myself. Sorry to be stuck with a theologian and a political scientist. But let me just introduce Bruce. Professor Pardy is a classically liberal legal academic who considers equal application of the law, negative rights, private property, limited government, and separation of powers to be foundational to the Canadian and Western legal tradition. A critic of legal progressivism, social justice, and the discretionary administrative state, he has written on a range of pressing legal subjects at the front lines of the cultural debates inside the law, including environmental governance, climate change, energy policy, human rights and freedoms, professional and university governance, that should be some interesting questions there, property and tort theory, free markets, and the rule of law. He has taught at law schools in Canada, United States, and New Zealand. As you know, he's currently at Queen's. And he practiced civil litigation at Borda Latner Gervais LLP in Toronto, and served as adjudicator and mediator on the Ontario Environmental Review Tribunal, and has published and commented widely in traditional and online media. So please help me welcome Bruce Pardy.
That's good, yeah. Can you hear me all right? Yes, good. I am so happy to be back. I was here a couple of years ago, this time of the year, and it was a fantastic experience in this room. I'm so glad to get a chance to talk with you. Thank you, Jens, for having me back. It's an honor and a joy to discuss these things with you. And I have to say that I am very grateful for Jens' intellectual courage and curiosity. He is the best. So you have a gem here. I hope you value him and the program. Paul, thank you very much for your welcome. Very much appreciated. And I'm very happy to be able to talk with you. Thank you for coming. I do hope that you will come up and say your piece, ask a question, that we can chat afterwards about these things. The Globe and Mail published this column in February 2022. The title, "It's Time to End the Sedition by Enforcing the Law and Following the Money." It says, in Ottawa, people have been terrorized for over a week. Seditionists and terrorists. Who is the author talking about? February 2022. Of course, the trucker convoy. No violence, no weapons, no assaults, no storming of Parliament, parking violations. Peaceful protest, road hockey, dancing in the snow, and unkind words about the government. Seditionists and terrorists. Who, can you guess, who is the author of this column? It's one Mark Carney. Now the Prime Minister. Who does the government fear? It's not foreign powers peddling influence. It's not organized crime. It's not hundreds of thousands of undocumented aliens in our midst. It's not Islamists calling for the end of the country. It's not violent criminals who get bail, light sentences, and early release. It's not arsonists who burn down churches. Who does the government fear the most? Isn't it obvious? The government fears Canadian citizens. And in particular, those of them who, more than anything else, want to be left alone. Because that is the one thing that governments will not, cannot do. Leave us alone. We live in a managerial society, planned and directed, progressive and socialist, pathologically self-destructive. This managerial state that we have coerces citizens in every conceivable way. Tells people what kind of cars to drive, how to carry their groceries, what medications to take, how to speak, what to think, who to hire, how you use your property. It oversees bank transactions, employment, and health records. It indoctrinates children. It controls the interest rate, the money supply, and the terms of credit. It taxes at work, at the store, at the pump, and then at home. The people are directed, influenced, regulated, supervised, controlled, tracked, and surveilled. The state dominates society. And society is becoming a product of the state. It has the people under its thumb. The greatest threat to the liberty, security, privacy, and prosperity of citizens is their own government. But not just in Canada. In the UK, people are being sent to prison for social media posts. And not just for a couple of days. Across the Western world, in Germany, Ireland, Australia, France, and even in the US, governments are tightening the screws on their own people. Why? Why are they doing this? Here is the technical, legal reason. Because they can. Okay? I'm not being facetious. That is the actual legal reason why. Because they can. They are doing this because they can. Because there is nothing to stop them. But what about the Constitution? What about rights? You will hear people say this. Our governments should honor the Constitution. Our governments, our leaders, our bureaucrats, our courts should honor the Constitution. John Adams said this about the American Constitution. Made for a moral people, both those who are governed and those who govern. Oh, please. If people were moral, you wouldn't need a constitution. Number one, those who are governed wouldn't need to be ruled over, and those who are doing the ruling wouldn't need a constitution to limit them. If people and governments were honorable, you wouldn't need a constitution. That's the whole point of having one. We could have philosopher kings instead. Lord Acton told us, power corrupts. Therefore, we need something to limit the power, and that's the Constitution. James Madison got it. If angels were to govern men, you wouldn't need controls. That's why we have them. A constitution that only works when people honor it is a house of straw. A constitution worth its weight must be impossible to dishonor. Which is why we're in the trouble we are. Liberal democratic states are not what they claim to be. They are full of paradoxes. Here's the first one. Jens asked this question. What does it mean to be free? Now, I'm speaking of freedom in the political, legal sense. When are you a free person? Here's my answer for you. You are free when you are not subject to the coercion of other people. No one with force or threats of force is making you do stuff you do not want to do. Your actions are voluntary. Freedom is the absence of force. If you are making your own calls, then you are free. Now, anarchists say that we should do away with the state altogether. Why do they say this? Well, because they say states take away freedoms. They inevitably become authoritarian, dictatorial, and corrupt. And the anarchists are not wrong about that. But imagine what anarchy is. It means no governments, no rules. Whatever people do is what you get. And what people are apt to do is be violent. If you are subject to the aggression of your neighbors, then you are not free. You are not free, likely, in a state of anarchy. Where there are no laws, people can try to defend themselves with their own weapons or the help of their family and friends, but that might keep the peace only in the short run. What you've got with anarchy is a vacuum. And human beings abhor a vacuum. Some aspiring warlord or gang leader or strongman or foreign ruler is going to see the vacuum and decide that he has more guns than anyone else and become the new state. So we end up where we are now, or worse. So anarchy won't do. Its critique is valid, but its solution is not. We need the state to keep the peace. The state can protect us from each other because, for the very reason that it holds a monopoly on violence. That's what you need to keep the peace. Yet, it threatens liberty for exactly the same reason. It has the power to keep the peace when it chooses, but also to coerce with impunity. Now, note this. Without force, laws don't work. In fact, let's go further. Laws are force. Without force, you've got no law. The state doesn't need to use violence most of the time. It's lurking in the background. The threat of fines and imprisonment and prosecution doesn't have to actually be there on the doorstep all the time. You know it's there. That's the thing that makes you stop at the red light so you don't get a ticket. That's violence. Without the violence, there is no law. The two things are two sides of the same coin. In other words, let's put it this way. When it comes to the state, we can't be free with it, and we can't be free without it. There's the paradox. And that's a paradox we have to solve. Which leads me to number 2. Here's the way our Constitution works. Its basic architecture, if you like. It says this: the state has unlimited power. It has the jurisdiction to do anything. And then what it tries to do is carve out some exceptions. All powerful, except. What are the exceptions? Well, of course, among them, the Charter of Rights, freedom of speech, security of the person, and so on. This unlimited power is truly unlimited in the sense that we have given our authorities the power, the legitimacy, the authority to provide for the general welfare, the common good, the public interest. Now, who is responsible for deciding when they've gone too far? Well, of course, the courts. Now, we think that the courts will do their job in accordance with some very basic and well-established principles. Precedent, logic, the rules of statutory interpretation. But that, in fact, is not really true. And even if it was, to the extent that it is, that leaves lots of room for them to do whatever they want. Let me put it this way to you. Constitutional documents, all of them, have an Achilles heel, which is that they are written in words. And words have inherent ambiguities. You can never nail down exactly what it's supposed to mean in a way that binds a court. And especially the highest courts, in our case, the Supreme Court of Canada, who have the power to interpret the words the way they want. Even when the meaning of a provision is clear as bell, as clear as day, the court has the power to decide that it's not, which our Supreme Court of Canada has done over and over and over again. That court has the last word on what the Constitution means. Over time, it has expanded its own control of Canadian society. And of course, the court itself is part of the state. We've given the job of restraining the state to a part of the state. That doesn't make sense. The Prime Minister, after all, controls who gets on the court. And once there, they sit to age 75, sometimes for decades, answerable to no one. The court, not the Constitution, determines the limit of state power. Now, note what this means. It means that you cannot reform the Constitution simply by adding stuff, new rights. You know, we had COVID, this didn't work, we needed a right that says this. Let's add more rights in there. That doesn't work. Those rights are subject to the power of the court to interpret what it means. And if the court does not want it to mean that, it won't mean that. And you are left powerless, subject to the power of the state. And when I say the state, I mean all the parts of the state together. Legislature, executive, bureaucracy, and courts. When those state institutions cooperate, there is literally nothing that they cannot do. Now, having a state, even one with limited powers, invites a powerful class to run it. You know, you're familiar with these people. Career politicians, untouchable bureaucrats, tenured judges, petty functionaries. Over time, the people who run the state create their own powerful institutions inside the state. A permanent civil service, captured regulators, the biomedical state, the military-industrial complex, the deep state. These actors use their status to enrich and empower themselves. Now, I don't mean to say there aren't exceptions. Some of the people who work for the state are honorable people who are doing their best, no question. But if you look at the trend, the pattern over time, this is not working. We have lavish benefits and pensions. We have regulatory expansion. We have growth of the public sector. Revolving doors between agencies and corporations. Lawfare. Subsidies. Pork barreling. Preferential laws. Bought influence. Insider contracts. Crony capitalism. Democracy, that is, government by the people, for the people, produces a powerful ruling elite. Number 4. Now, I should just say, this is not an exhaustive list. I'm going to stop at 4. But we can do this all night if you want to. But I think 4 is enough to give you the sense of what I'm talking about. Number 4, the state claims to protect us from entities that are threatening and dangerous, but so happens to be the entities that the state itself creates. We need a big, powerful state to protect us from big, powerful corporations. That's one of the arguments that you'll hear. But without the state, corporations would not exist. They don't exist. They only exist because the state has passed a statute that says we're going to have these things called the corporation. If you want to create one, here are the steps. And once you've done that, here are the features, here are the advantages, here are the powers that the corporation has. Corporations are a product of the state. Just like law is a product of the state. Now, corporations are not the only entities that the state creates. We also have unions, charities, central banks, municipalities, universities, school boards, Indian bands, political parties, and professional regulators, and so on. These are all in a form that the state has invented. And they all have legal personality, meaning they can do what a human being can do. They can own property, they can make contracts, they can sue and be sued, and then they have some extra ones. Like, in the case of corporations, limited liability for their investors. In fact, they have other powers and rights that go beyond what normal human beings can do. If you're a human being operating an enterprise on your behalf, as a sole proprietor or in a partnership, if you take on a liability, then you are liable for the debt to the end of your assets. If you are a shareholder in a corporation and the corporation owes a debt, then you are not liable for that debt except to the extent of your shares. Okay? Limited liability. The idea is it encourages investment, and it does, because it creates an advantage. But we've made a choice. And the choice is that the schmuck who holds the debt is going to go without, because of this environment we're creating to try and get people to buy shares. So, what can we do about all of this? Well, we could have set things up differently, and we still can in theory. It would be, let's just acknowledge this, it would be next to impossible to do so in this country in the present climate. Of course. But it would be politics and culture that would get in the way. My point is this. It is politics and culture that would get in the way. It is not for a lack of a legal choice. There is a form to use to resolve these paradoxes and get on with their lives in a way that is not interfered with by the state in every day in every way. And I'm going to suggest to you 5 principles. And again, this is not an exhaustive list, but 5 ideas that we might be able to apply to change the nature of the regime that we are living under. Here's the first one. I described to you the basic architecture. The Constitution says the state's power is unlimited, except, okay? You flip the default. The state is powerless. It has the power and jurisdiction to do nothing, except. In other words, those powers to be exercised by the various parts of the state are going to be expressly identified in the Constitution. And those that are not identified, you have no power to do. None. Here are the things that will not be listed among them. I mean, the list is infinite, right? But here are among the first things that we will not list: the general welfare, the public interest, the common good. You give the state those to rule over, then you've just created the same problem. So what should the exceptions be? What should the Constitution expressly give the state the power to do? Well, I'm going to suggest to you 3 areas, and not much else. Number 1, as we've talked about, to keep the peace. That is, you want police. Number 2, to resolve disputes between citizens. If your neighbor steals your car, you want some place to go and fix it. Police, courts. That's 1, 2, and 3. To protect the country from the outside. You probably want a military. You probably want borders. Keep the peace, resolve disputes, protect the country. Those 3 things and not much else. So, if the state has only the powers expressly granted, what can it not do? Now, again, we can list things all night, but here are just a taste, right? It can't expropriate property. It can't collect taxes. It can't create public institutions. It can't operate or provide public health care. It can't operate public schools. It can't regulate speech. It can't provide subsidies or grants. It can't prevent citizens from, quote, discriminating in their private lives. It can't create monopolies. It can't issue currency, whether paper coin or digital. It can't restrict people to their homes. You can't close businesses, and so on and so forth. Again, there's a whole long list. It is infinite. The thing you should not try to do is to try to list all the things it cannot do. That's the other model. This model is the state can do nothing except for these specific things and these alone. Next suggestion. I suggested to you that to be free means to be not subject to the force of other people, including the state. Okay, so if this reimagined place is going to be a free country, that means, by definition, you are not subject to the force or threats of force of other people. Therefore, all of us will be subject to a central basic prohibition. No use of force or threats of force. You can't go around beating your neighbors up. You can't steal their car. You can't hit them on the head with a ladder by mistake. All kinds of things that you cannot do because of the prohibition on force. All kinds of things you will recognize. But that is going to be essentially the only prohibition on your actions. Why? Because the implication of being free is that you are making voluntary decisions. So let me give you an example. Let's say you have a state that says, we understand that when you go riding your bicycle down the street, you're liable to get into an accident and hurt yourself. And we don't want to see that happen. So we're going to have a rule that you can't ride your bicycle without a helmet. Sorry, can't be done. Why? Because the state can't use force, and laws are force. You can't have a rule that prohibits somebody from taking voluntary action. Now, there are going to be 2 exceptions, right? You've got to have 2 exceptions to that rule. Number 1, if your neighbor comes after you, you've got to be able to respond in self-defense. So, force in response to force, okay. And the second one is the exception for the state. If your neighbor comes after you and you call the police, okay, well now the police have a job to do. and that is to use their force against the application of force. Both exceptions are in response to the violation of that rule. If there's no violation of the rule, the state cannot use its force, that is, cannot create laws that govern your behavior. And in that way, you will be free. Suggestion number 3. Right now, we have a professional ruling class. I mentioned them before. Career politicians, entrenched bureaucrats, tenured judges. We don't want those people. The best way to limit the power of your professional ruling class is not to have one. And instead, you create a country with an amateur public service. What do I mean by that? Well, you've all heard the suggestion that politicians maybe should be subject to term limits. Well, they have it in the States for the president. You can run twice, 8 years total, and then your time is up. Okay, good. I mean that, but I mean it on steroids. Try this. Pick an arbitrary number, 6 years maybe 8. That is the length of time that anyone is allowed to serve the state over their lifetime, cumulatively, in any role. So you run for office, great. You win, terrific. You sit for 2 terms, let's call it 8 years. Great, thank you, you're done. You can't be a judge, you can't be a bureaucrat, you can't be an ambassador, you can't be a consultant, you can't be a receptionist. You're done. This is an amateur public service. One of the objections to this idea is, but how are you going to incentivize the best people, the most accomplished, most educated, most creative people to serve the state? The proper answer to that is, you don't want them to serve the state. You want them to be in the private sector. Now, to make sure that this takes, we're going to add a couple of things. Number 1, anybody who works for the state, in any capacity, will be paid the national median wage. Median wage, the middle wage. Therefore, you can afford to do it. It's not like going without, but it is not a way to get rich. There will be no pensions, no bonuses, and you will not be allowed to accept any kind of remuneration or gifts from anybody else. That's it. In other words, what we're trying to get to is an amateur public service whose people serve to provide public service, and for no other reason. And if you have trouble recruiting people to work for the state, that's exactly what we want. Second last one. Now, I've talked about the problem of the courts. The courts have the power, and especially the highest court has the power to tell us all what the law is. Because they are the ones that have the power to interpret the words and tell us what they mean. And the Supreme Court of Canada in this country has done that again on steroids. And one of the tools that they have to accomplish that task is the power of precedent. That is, when the Supreme Court decides that the Charter does or does not allow assisted suicide, both of which they have decided at different times, that decision is binding upon all the lower courts. In other words, at that moment, the Charter, the Constitution, no longer rules. The Supreme Court rules. through the power of precedent. Now, precedent itself is thought to be a feature of the rule of law, because the rule of law is about, at least in part, about predictability. Some kind of certainty. You know what the law is, and the law is being applied the same way in every case. The same rules apply to everybody. It's a good idea. But it is the theory of the idea. We have the doctrine of precedent in our law in this country. And our law has never been more uncertain and unpredictable than it is right now. So what do? It's not serving the purpose it was designed to serve. What it's doing is empowering that star chamber at the Supreme Court. So what do? We take it away. You can make decisions, but your decision is not binding upon lower courts. What effect will that have? In each and every case, each judge in each court will need to go back to the text of the document itself. And the words will be there. And yes, that court will interpret it again. And yes, they still have the power to interpret it. But at least you start every time with the words themselves, which right now we do not do. Okay, so we are trying to disempower and to topple the regime that we have created at the country's highest court. And finally, imagine what living in a country where the only other entities you interact with are other people. No corporate contracts, no small print, no overwhelming corporate might, no concentration of economic power, no mandatory union membership, no control by a central bank, and so on and so forth. If only human beings are legal persons, then everybody is now on a level playing field with the same powers, the same rights. You can make contracts with whoever you want. This does not mean you can't gather in groups and conduct commercial enterprises together, not at all. You can do whatever you want with other people with contracts. All it means is you can't cheat in the way that corporations are allowed to cheat. It would create a different kind of environment, I think, altogether. In a now famous video, you may have seen this on the internet, Argentinian President Javier Milei is standing at a whiteboard. And in front of him are the names of all the ministries in his government. And he walks down the board, ripping off the names. Ministry of Tourism and Sports, out, as he tears it off. Ministry of Culture, out. Ministry of Environment and Sustainable Development, out. And so on down the line. He has slashed the size and reach of his government. And he is rescuing his country from the ravages of socialism. And good for him. But even he has not conquered the managerial state. Why? Well, because these are mere flesh wounds. When he's gone and a new regime is in place, this fatty tissue will just grow back. What he has not done is change the architecture. Slash and burn is all very well, I'm for that, but it does not put a stake through the heart of statism. To imagine what the state should be, start with Nothing. Don't calculate what powers you can take away. In a state of anarchy, we have nothing. Now, what do we absolutely have to have, starting from there, in order to be free? That is the question. Constitutions do not protect freedom simply by expressing limits on what the state can do, because state actors do not honor those limits. They believe that they are in charge. And under most constitutions, they are right. Now, the ideas I've mentioned to you are not what people are used to. But Western civilization is unraveling. Somehow, somewhere, we need to correct the mistakes that are bringing all these countries to their knees. To go where you have never gone, you need to do what you have never done. If we want to win, we have to play a different game. I'll leave it there. Thanks very much.